Do my silly little dance.
Love
All right. Welcome back again to another Soul Connection call. I am so delighted today to be doing a live that's literally live, doing it live with a new person I've never met before, just was connected with. And I love having authentic, open conversations with people. So, Justine, I'm so glad you're here for a Living Luna Soul Connection call. If you'd go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. I'm Justine Carino. I am a psychotherapist with a private practice in New York and Connecticut. And I treat anyone 15 and older. I do a lot of young adult work, so college age, 20s, early 30s. I also work with families, and I also do some couples work. I think I'm known a lot for treating anxiety disorders, and I do a lot of content online around perfectionism, people pleasing, high achievement, type A personalities, and how those types of individuals tend to struggle with anxiety a lot more, and why. Why do they struggle with anxiety a lot more? So that's me.
Amazing. Yeah. Anxiety is such an important specialization because one of the things that I teach is that 100% of us experience anxiety and depression because it's our nervous system's way of trying to balance the equation. But when that anxiety gets to be overwhelming and it's impacting your life in a big way, that's really important to take care of. So I honor that specialty. It's a very, very important one. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Uh, so, for those of you who don't know me, and for Justine here, since we're meeting for the first time, I'm Safrianna Lughna. I am a licensed clinician. I'm no longer seeing clients one on one. I actually made the decision last year to retire my private practice for now. And now I'm doing this queer spirit guide thing, doing podcasts, helping people step into their authenticity in a post traumatic growth sort of setting, and really bringing in that holistic spiritual view. So, I used to specialize in helping people with PTSD specifically and dissociative disorders. So, really, the hardcore trauma stuff. That's my personal background, is a lot of trauma. So, I kind of had that wounded healer archetype for a while and have since kind of moved away from that. So, it's been a really interesting journey. And I love that we anchored into people pleasing today as our sort of leap off point for this conversation, because people pleasing is the thing I've been really unpacking personally over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, and have really made headway on that journey. But oh my gosh, how many of us are people pleasing to survive? So, please feel free to share what you see about people pleasing and survival.
Absolutely. So I think I came upon honing in on this trait, right? Because for those watching, people pleasing isn't a disorder, right? It's kind of like a thing we do sometimes. I just noticed it as a common thread through so many people that I have been working with that were coming in for anxiety treatment. And no, it was universal with age. They could have been 15, they could have been 20, they could have been 50, they could have been 30, right? It was like, like these clients over and over again, when we were getting to the root of some of what was causing their anxiety to really be triggered, was this need to make sure they were seen a certain way,
Hmm.
that they were taking care of everyone around them, fear of disappointing others, fear of conflict, in so many variable relationships. Like they're afraid to disappoint their mom, but they're also afraid to disappoint their partner, or maybe they're just afraid to disappoint their kid and their boss. Like it was just everywhere. And so I'm like, what is going on here? Like there is such a correlation between the anxiety and the people pleasing. But if we go back in time, right, if we think about ourselves as cave people, we started to develop some traits and keep them because they were useful to us. And people pleasing was so useful if you think of being a cave person, right? We needed a tribe to survive. If we were alone as a cave person, we were more likely to be killed and die off. So we wanted to be liked by the tribe of people around us, right? To share resources, tips, tricks, How do you hunt that deer? How do you make that bear blanket? How do we start a fire? Can we huddle together for warmth? I'm a birth a baby. Can you help me give birth to this baby? Right? We needed people. We were wired to be social. So there was such a benefit to making other people like us and accept us and make us feel a sense of belonging, right? So from there, right, it's now 2024. We're still imprinted and wired to want to connect, right? And we are happier connected, but it's not as life threatening,
Right.
to be disconnected.
Yes, it's like our nervous systems evolved because we were running from danger, right? We were literally having to survive absolute untold danger, like tigers and stuff, right? And now it's tax deadlines and, work schedules and families. Like it's not, yes, there's a lot of trauma and again, trauma specialist, but
Yeah.
like our average daily life, we're not running from tigers, but our nervous systems are still primed for that
Yes.
and ready for danger, and the idea of being alone is something that so many of us fear today, even though we're more connected or more capable of being connected than ever. And I see this really interesting dynamic between that. Like I want to be connected and I want to be close to people, but also like I'm afraid or I'm ashamed or there's something deeper here, and then people will judge themselves because there's so much more access to connection. And they're like, why can't I do this? Right. And that I think just reinforces like, well, I'll do what I've always known worked. And that's kind of doing what makes other people happy, not necessarily standing in my power because I don't want to make waves. Right. Just all of these subtle narratives. What are some of those stories that you hear people say a lot?
Well, I also find like we're talking about survival as a species, but we also like developed this people pleasing trait and anxiety because of surviving in our family system too.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my training is in Bowenian family systems theories and how we're all kind of connected as a system and a family. And we each have a family of origin, right? These are the people that raised us, biological or not, whoever you considered a parent or a sibling, that's your family of origin. And they're kind of like this template, this map, this blueprint of how we relate to other people, how we make decisions, how we set boundaries, how we process our emotions, right? And it's all subconscious. Like it's just getting in our brains. We even know we've internalized these models. And sometimes the people pleasing helped the family system stay at a homeostasis,
Right.
kept everyone safe and well. Even if it was to your detriment, right? In the moment, it served a purpose, right? So some examples could be if you let your parent down, maybe it was an extreme case, there's abuse, neglect, something, verbal, physical, sexual, right? God forbid, but talking to trauma specialists here, right?
All of it, all of the above in many cases, unfortunately.
Yeah. So if we take one end of the spectrum with severe trauma, right? Someone will adapt to please that person that is harmful to them, right? But if we look at the other end of the spectrum, maybe it was more subtle. Like you felt like your parents paid more attention to you as long as you were pleasing them. Maybe you got along better if you were pleasing them. Maybe your siblings were rebellious and you were the golden child and you're like, they have too much on their hands. I'm going to distract them by being the golden kid.
Yeah.
It kind of glued people together to help everyone move forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because there can be family systems that are perpetuating that people-pleasing dynamic for a particular lineage of bad behavior. That's what I'm going to call it, right? Like the problematic behavior, the abusive behavior. There can be clusters in families that are like, oh no, we let grandpa do that. That's just what grandpa does. Or, there's like excuse making, which perpetuates that story too. So much of what I'm curious about is generational trauma and how we just like pass this stuff on and we just keep passing this stuff on.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'll use myself as an example. I love the example you just gave of the golden child because that was me. Like I could tell I was very empathic growing up. I'm an empath, so of course I could pick up on these things early. But I could tell mom wasn't having an easy life. Whatever was going on behind the scenes, I didn't know all of that, but I could feel that, right?
Mhm.
And then she's dealing with all this stress. So I'm going to be the good kid, right? I'm going to make sure I get good grades because that's what she's telling me I need to do. Like that's how I succeed. And I know so many of us grew up with that message of if you get good grades, you try hard in school, you're a good boy or a good girl or a good kid, whatever, like you will meet success. And then we get there and we're not at success yet and we're still stuck in other people's stories. And
Yes.
so that it's like for me that people pleasing journey was like well, I did what I was told I was supposed to do and I'm not getting the results I told I was going to get. So is there something wrong with me? And that really reinforced like, well, I'm just going to try harder to make sure everyone else around me is happier because that will lead me to success somehow,
Yes.
right?
Yes, absolutely. And I really view this people pleasing also as under the perfectionism umbrella, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a branch of perfectionism, and it's perfectionism in a relational sense. Like, can I be a perfect child or a perfect friend or a perfect partner? And then we make these subconscious rules of like, the perfect daughter will not or should not do blank. So
Mm.
a perfect daughter will never make her parents upset. A perfect daughter will never make mistakes, right? Or a perfect friend will never say no. They'll just go along with what everyone wants. A perfect employee always does blank, works hard on the weekends, stays late, stays overtime, right? So it's a relational perfectionism of like being seen in a certain way, but it's just so heavily internalized that we don't even know what's going on. And when in my
Mhm.
therapy sessions, I always find the shoulds or the should not. So I'll say like, so you're telling me because you're a daughter, you shouldn't ever disappoint your mother or father by telling them you're upset with something. And then people are like, oh, mind blown, like, wow, I didn't even realize I had that rule for myself.
Yeah, the shooting all over ourselves, right? Ugh.
That is like the best therapist joke. I love
It
it.
is. It so is the best therapist joke, but it's so true, right?
Yes.
And even having done the work that I've done to unpack that one, I'll still throw out a should every now and then, and I'm like, "Whoa, where did that come from?" Right? That's my invitation to go within and like see what parts of me are coming up, and
Yes.
why are we resurfacing? And that's something you know, the hardest relationships we ever have are the ones that we have after we've kind of escaped a traumatic situation or have moved away from something where there was a bad pattern, like a limiting pattern, a pattern that wasn't comfortable, something that just wasn't in alignment for us. And
Right.
then getting in a new relationship, all of that stuff we've experienced is coming with us. So even if a new relationship, friendship, romantic relationship, family, reconnection, we can have that should come with us and
Mhm.
then infect almost that relationship. Dawn says, same, I still throw out the I should. Yeah, it's an ongoing thing and we don't want to shame ourselves for that once we have that awareness. It's like, oh, this is now an invitation for me to see where I like how you put it, like these rules, right? We're making up these rules for ourselves.
We make up so many rules, and I think that's where the guilt, like you're saying, the guilt and shame come in. And I also like to challenge people's guilt. They'll be like, oh, I feel so guilty that I didn't do this or I did that. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, guilt should be associated with you doing something wrong, right? You're guilty, like, I have done something wrong and I should apologize for it. I own it. I take accountability. I feel terrible. But 99% of the times in these conversations, we're realizing you didn't do anything wrong. Like, it's not wrong to say no.
Right.
It's not wrong to change your mind. So it's not really about the other person anymore. It's you trying to control how people see you sometimes too.
Yeah.
And like,
Oh,
I call it the irrational guilt. Like, your guilt isn't really rational right now because you technically haven't done anything wrong, but your mind is making you think you've done something wrong because you have these rigid rules about how you should be as a person to other people in your life.
well, and we live There's two big paths I want to go down here. One is that I love the differentiation between shame and guilt because so many people get those two confused. And a lot of times we just can shine that light and things start to kind of break apart. It's like, oh, no, I didn't actually do anything wrong here. I said no, I stood in my boundaries, right? One of my phrases that I use with clients all the time is someone who doesn't respect your no does not deserve your yes, right?
I love that.
Very important one. But the other path is that we live in a society that's very judgmental and likes to throw around guiltiness that doesn't actually exist a lot of times. And when we see that on a cultural level or a societal level, that's having an internal impact. And so I wonder if we're an overly guilted culture out of things that are totally not like actually things that we should be holding just because there's been these stories told.
Absolutely. And as you're saying that, I just wrote a note down. Like, I feel like we live in a very all or nothing society right now, right? Like, you're either successful or you're not, you're this or you're that. And we're forgetting about the in-betweens, the gray areas, the ish, like you're wrong-ish or you're right-ish, right? Like there's always an in-between, and our brains like the all or nothing to categorize decisions and people. They like me or they don't like me. Well, maybe it's neither. Maybe we're like in this in-between phase, right? Like we're forgetting the in-between things, and the judgments can be so polarizing too about other people. And like, not to go into politics, this is a political time right now. So it's like you're on one side or the other. Like, what about the in-between feelings and decisions and thoughts, right? So I think you're right. Like and that's what perfectionism does too. It lives in the all or nothing. Like I'm either perfect or I'm not. For people pleasers, I've either let them down and they hate me, or they love me. Well, maybe you let them down, but they still love you and like you. Maybe they're just disappointed with something you've done.
Right. And we want relationships where we don't have to show up perfectly, right? If we feel a deep seated need to people please, and that is kind of cropping up, it's like, and I say this all the time, like I will say, there is a part of me right now that really thinks I should make this choice because I think you want me to make this choice. And I just call it out now. And
Yeah.
it's so validating to be in relationships
Like
where A,
that.
I can do that. And B, like they're like, no, then don't do that. Right. Versus if we're finding ourselves trapped where when we try to speak up for what we want, right, we're met with resistance, we're met with not good communication, we're met with BS excuses, right? Like, oh, we could totally get into politics, but um we'll really shrink ourselves to try and fit wherever we feel like we're not going to be alone. Also, Dawn says, love this. That validates my current theme, Justine. So I'm so glad this is resonating.
Me
You
too.
know, the idea right now of our global political situation that I just keep coming back to is us versus them mentality, and how us versus them mentality is like our biggest issue. And I think that people pleasing plays into that on a big level. Like,
Mhm.
I need to be safe, I need to be right, I need to find my people. That means there is a wrong people. That means
Right.
there is a wrong way to be. And those people over there are undesirable. So I don't want to be like them so that I can be a part of us.
Yes.
Ugh.
Themselves, to feel connected in a way that I fit in with this particular group or opinion or thought process. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's hard to also take a risk nowadays, I feel like, and stand by an opinion. I'm also thinking like on social media, there's a lot of thought leaders that will post a thought, and then you see all the comments of people challenging those thoughts. And it's like, well, they're not reading between the lines, their nuances. Not everything someone posts is the absolute truth. And I think we have to get better at being like, okay, this comment or this quote doesn't apply directly to me in this circumstance, and maybe applies to the person posting it, right? And I think that's what's tough about social media. You can't always see or understand the nuances.
No, I mean, I'm just going to use the current example since we are here today, which is the Olympics, right? There was this Olympic performance where they were actually putting on a performance about um, Bacchus and like Greek god stuff. And some people saw a picture, just a picture of it, and thought that it was mocking Christianity. Now, that's not what was happening at all in this
Oh,
case. Like,
interesting.
it was actually a Greek god performance. And when you saw the whole performance in context with the commentary from the commentators, they said exactly what it was. But then some people saw, again, one little not nuanced piece of it, applied it to what their immediate response was, and this has blown up. I mean, I'm seeing so much fighting on social
Interesting.
media right now about it because there's two main groups. There's the group that's like, I'm a Christian who is offended by this. And
Right.
then the other group is the, oh my God, you're all stupid, shut up. Neither of these sides is really nuanced or open for
Yes.
discourse, of course,
Yes.
and is just perpetuating again this us versus them.
Yeah.
So, and there's elements of people pleasing in that too, right? There's the
Sure.
I want to defend myself because I need to show up as perfect for my religion in this case. And
Right.
then there's the I need to be the leader that speaks up on this and is superior because
Absolutely.
I need to show up as the expert and the authority to my audience.
Yes.
Oh,
And I think also the people pleasing shows up there too, because it's like if I say or do the wrong thing, I will be rejected by one of these parties. And a lot of the people pleasing people struggle with is that fear of abandonment and
yep,
fear of rejection. If I can be myself and say how I feel, I'm somehow going to be rejected, abandoned, criticized, or attacked, right? And how do I put myself at risk of that? So many people opt out and don't assert their needs or their opinions or their thoughts based of that fear.
yeah. I mean, I just to share another personal example, I had a lot of visibility problems for a long time. Like, I tell you, if you asked me of 5 years ago, like, you're going to do a live talk show about whatever you and your guest want to talk about, I would have literally like laughed and then cried because I would have been like, I'll never be there
Yeah.
because I was so afraid of showing up because of little comments that I would hear. My mom, for example, so I'm polyamorous, I'm queer, not mainstream at all, right? And I started writing in like my bios when I would share who I was, that those were identifying things because it was actually helping me find clients and find community members because they were identifying. But then my family of origin, specifically my mom, was like, you shouldn't put that in there. That's going to lose you your audience. And what that was actually saying is that I was losing her,
Yeah.
not that I was losing my audience, but that's we have a crippling terror about losing family of origin. All of us do, and that's biological. That is routed in your blood and bones, friends. Don't shame yourself for it. Like the fear of losing family is huge, even if you have not had a family that's been supportive. But also just that fear of, am I going to lose my livelihood for showing up as who I am? Am I going to be judged? Am I going to get kicked out of my church community? Whatever it is, right? That fear, I think that fear's probably one of the number one contributors to people pleasing.
Absolutely. It's so much fear. And I think it's reinforced. Like we're talking about the societal norms, like this cancel culture, like people are canceled for mistakes at times, right? Like, sometimes people deserve to be canceled, fine. But again, there's nuances, right?
There's nuance.
People are canceled for a mistake. They made a mistake and we're forgetting they're a human being. So if people are not perfect all the time, then they're exiled. So that feeds perfectionism. I have to be perfect or I'm at risk of being exiled. There's just so much fear to be abandoned, right? And like you're saying, this innate longing to fit in with your family, right? Like we're wired that way. I used to work on an inpatient children's psychiatric facility, which was my first job out of grad school. I loved it, but it was hard work.
I bet.
I remember, like, in the early years, fresh out of grad school, seeing like a 5-year-old boy have a visit with a parent who I knew this 5-year-old's chart. Like, this 5-year-old was badly physically abused by this parent, right? And then here they are on visiting day, and this kid wants nothing more to hug this parent, to love this parent, right? And that's how the brain works, right? And I remember being like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, that seems like such a contradiction. Wouldn't he fear this parent? There's no, unfortunately, and at that age, it's survival. If we go back to cave people, we needed to be loved and accepted from our parents to survive. We depended on them. At 5 years old, you rely on your parents to survive. So we can go all into that abuse and trauma and neglect in that scenario. But I remember that was the moment for me that I was like, family connections are huge. They are huge for our mental health and well-being and survival and who we are today. And that's why I work with a lot of adults that are sitting on the couch with me and are like, wow, like I didn't realize how much my family of origin impacts who I am, and like my current romantic relationship. Like, why am I so triggered by this? And we can trace it back to family dynamics in childhood.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like that I'm sure you talk so much about that on your podcast, but that's huge. Like I've experienced that as well. You know, I worked in a nonprofit when I first started as a therapist, and I mean, we had to do CPS reports and whatnot because we were working with sexual violence, domestic violence, all that not so great stuff. And these kids don't want to be taken from their parents, right? And there is still that little kid in you, no matter how old you are, that part of you that is so attached. And so I'd love to speak a little bit to when the people pleasing, we're waking up to the fact that we're having to people please, especially with a family member. And we start to get pushback when we break free of that, right? Because my answer is usually pretty radical. You know, one of the things that a lot of my clients never knew was an option was you don't have to be in contact with your family member if you're unplugged, right? A lot of times there's financial stuff, there's children, there's whatever that's involved. But I would also, when it was appropriate, be like, you don't have to be in contact with your family. That is now a choice for you. So let's explore the choice. But for people who either feel like they don't have a choice, but they want to break free from the people pleasing, I'm curious where you would go with that.
It's such a process, right? And each situation is so unique and carefully unpacked and broken down, right? Is there a cost or benefit to how you speak up, in what ways you speak up? Are you financially dependent? Are you not? Like you're saying, there's so many things that go into making a decision about your communication with a family member. I'll give you an example. Like, I have a client in his 30s, and he lives on his own, and it just clicked for him when he goes to visit his parents' house and a fight breaks out that he could leave. He's like, oh my God, I can get in my car and go home. I don't live here anymore. Like, why am I sitting here anymore? I'm gonna leave now. So that's the strategy. He's like, bye everyone. Like, I've hit the point of no return. I'm going to go to my house now and deal with you all when we can calm down and be mature adults, right? So that's great. Like, depending where he is, he can leave, but there's people that can't, right? And they're trying to figure out, how do I stop pleasing this person all the time? I think it takes a lot of coaching and experimentation of the person on the other end. Can they receive you? Can they actually listen to you and try and work with you? Are they purely narcissistic and they can't at all, and it's always going to be their way, and we kind of have to deal with it internally until you can make your escape from the relationship, if that is what you need? So we kind of really have to unpack who's on the receiving end of your change, right? And I see this every time when you start to change and set more boundaries, right? So the first thing is boundary setting for the people pleaser. What can you say no to? And let's start small. What's one thing that's not working that we can change and see how people receive that change? But no matter how big or small the boundary change is, it's different for the other people around you, the people receiving this, and they don't really like that, right? So sometimes family members, friends, partners, they will act out in ways to get you back to the old way. Like, I don't like you this way. You always said yes, or you always put me first, or this, that, and the other. And they will try and get you to revert back to who you used to be. And that's when you come complain in therapy to me and say, I tried it and it didn't work. And then I say, let's try it again. Let's find another way to do this, right? So there's a little, like, people have to be open-minded. It's not going to change overnight. People are going to be pissed that you're changing. People are not going to be happy that you're changing. You are going to be met with resistance as long as you're in a safe environment, right? There's not going to be any physical abuse put on you or severe emotional abuse put on you for standing up for yourself. Let's just try it in baby steps. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely. I love that. I love the who is on the receiving end of your change, because that's really like when we know we're going through a change, it's important to update people around us. Like I remember, oh gosh, it's been about 3 years now. I had this huge, like, oh my God, I have been so codependent. I didn't know what codependency was. I didn't realize that codependency and people pleasing had anything in common. Right? Like I didn't know these were one and the same. And I had to come to like my partner at the time and basically say, I've been really showing up in XYZ ways, and I'm recognizing that's not actually like an energy I can continue to put out there. I'm going to start to back off here. And fortunately, this is my wife here I'm talking about. My wife is like, "Oh my gosh, like did I make you do this?" And I'm like, "No, this is my old trauma. Like we're unpacking it." But like also I need to stop doing XYZ. And
Yeah.
then in my next relationship, again, since polyamorous, with my other partner, I was even a little bit better with the people pleasing and could catch it quicker and just announce it. So it's like we have to keep updating our safe people about the changes. But yeah, if you're in a situation, one of the things that I have a little freebie guide on I think it's like my 5 tips on building better boundaries, because
Amazing.
boundaries are so important. And one of the tips is you have to be able to internally hold the boundary. So that means,
huge. Yes.
yeah, if you can't internally hold the boundary, one of the reasons you wouldn't be able to internally hold the boundary is if the external situation is violent, right? And that, again, physically, verbally, whatever. Like if you try to draw the boundary and you get met with such vitriolic feedback that you can't hold it internally, like it's going to crumble immediately and it's going to kind of continue to perpetuate that. Versus if you're like, okay, I know this boundary is solid, I'm announcing it, I'm firm with it, and I'm not backing down, right? And you also have that safety, it's kind of a different story. So there is a lot of nuance. And yeah, as Dawn just said in the comments, silent agreement was made and it is okay to begin the change. Yeah, you can always begin that process of change and just recognizing, oh, I've been operating under this old pattern, but I'm in a new situation and I can adopt, or I'm in an old situation and I'm going to see if it can change with me.
Yes.
I
like that first. Like, let's see if the people can change with us. I think some people are quick to run out the door and escape because I think there's a fear of no matter what I do, they won't change with me. So let me just reject them first before they reject me, or let me get out of this before I'm really let down because they're not going to be able to show up for me.
oh God, yeah.
But I think there has to be this like incubator of let's see if this relationship can survive the changes I'm making. And maybe there does need to be compromise with the other person, whether it's your partner, your mother, your father, your sibling. Like maybe you're starting to change and set boundaries, and then they're meeting you with their new set of boundaries too. And maybe this gives them space to say, well, I need you to do this differently for me. So there has to be this little like Play-Doh that of change that we're trying to work through to see if we can get on the other side. And not all relationships can, and that's okay.
Yes.
But a lot can, and don't abandon it before you go through that.
That is, oh my gosh, it's such an important point. And it's funny, I'm actually getting started developing a relationships course with other therapists. We're making this little mini course together. And that's like one of the topics we're going to start with, because how many of us like see one little possible red flag? It's not even confirmed a red flag yet. It's not like outward awful. And we're like, oh my gosh, this reminds me of something from my past. I'm running. Like I am hightailing it out there. And maybe this person was actually mature enough to handle a little bit of feedback. Maybe they've never gotten the feedback before. That's another huge thing is, oh, like we're running around with all this generational trauma. And not many of us have grown up in households that have challenged that yet. I'm seeing it now with people who are raising children right now, which is so exciting to me. I'm like, yay, we're doing it. But
Yeah.
most of us that are adults right now didn't really have a super nurturing, communicative environment. Maybe our needs were met, but there still wasn't emotional depth and intelligence. Maybe we never wanted for anything, but still there just wasn't connection. We
Yes.
don't know how to connect and repair.
Absolutely. It's a lot of people don't know how to repair. A lot of families, cultures, right? There's a blow up and then we pretend it never happens, right?
Yep.
And let's move on, sweep it on the rug. So we don't know how to like address awkward, uncomfortable situations. It's like we either cut the person off or we pretend it never happened. Again, the all or nothing. We're losing the third step of like, this is uncomfortable, this is different, and let's talk about how this relationship can be better for both of us, which we missed out on. I'm raising kids right now. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I think my generation of parents, right, we are like aliens to our parents and grandparents because we're too soft or too this. And we see such a difference in just one generation of parenting nowadays. And it is confusing. It's like we were parented this way, X, and now we're being told we should parent that way, Y. And so when we try to parent in the Y way, right, the new way, it's so hard because we didn't have a model for what that looked like. So we're reading the books, we're listening to the podcasts, we're talking to friends. We're like, I want to lose my shit on you, but I'm not supposed to yell. So I'm going to calm myself. But I don't know how to do that, right? It's so confusing and hard. But I do see the change, and the change is good. But it's so different than how it used to be.
Yes. And like the piece with that, like we're human and we do say and do things we don't mean sometimes. And instead of pretending it never happened, the new way is to acknowledge, take ownership, and try and make a change. Right. And so I love when I see parents who have they crossed a line, maybe they yelled at their kid, they lost their shit, right? And then they go back to that child and they're like, by the way, I've reflected on earlier, I was very upset and I should not have yelled at you in that way because that's not how we work with our feelings. I could have said, I'm really mad right now and I need to take a step back, right? Depending on the age of the kid, of course. But like that is the discourse that models the rupture repair process. And I think that if as a society we could learn rupture and repair, what couldn't we do? If we could agree to disagree, if we could make mistakes and not cancel each other immediately, like where would we be? We'd be in a totally different place.
Let's find the gray areas, the in between, the ish areas in our life. It's so true. And I think back to people pleasing, parenting, if you're a people pleaser or you've struggled with it and you become a parent, and now it's not about you, perhaps, maybe you have to set the boundary about for your child's sake. That's where you're really called to task because you're like, wow, I have to show up for this kid to protect them in some way. And I am so scared and uncomfortable. The kids will force you into the position to be like, all right, I'm standing up for my kid. What I'm about to say to this other person is going to displease them, but I love this little being more than myself. So I'm going to do it for their sake. And that's also interesting to watch people do too. And that parenthood transformed the people pleasing. They're like, before kids, I was so scared, and now with kids, I have to stand up for this little child in some way.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to me. That I think really speaks to the generational shift that is happening. And I think a lot of it is this acknowledgement of the generational trauma. That was so not there until very recently.
Yeah.
But I know that in my family system and many of the clients I've worked with, the elder parents, right? Like not the current with little kids, but the elder parents, they didn't stand up for their kids because they were so societally programmed into that people pleasing. Like, this is how you do it. This is how you raise kids. This is how you work. This is how you are in a marriage. This is how you live the American dream or your society's, cultural norms. This is how you follow your religion. And so there was no breaking free from that until recently, or like we didn't hear about people who tried to break free from it much in the past. Or if we did, they're considered radical, right? Like completely radical.
So
but
true.
I would like a society where we all stand up for children, especially the bodily autonomy and like emotions of children, because until more recently, children were largely viewed as like objective extensions of you that go do what you need them to do.
Yes, and they don't always listen, and they don't always want to do what we want them to do.
Yeah, and we don't beat them when they don't do that. That's not the right response, right? And that, oh my gosh, like it makes so much sense why we have, an epidemic of people pleasing and why it's still so hard for many of us adults to say what we want or stand up for a boundary. I mean, and that is still something I'll laugh about it. I'll be like, I want to watch a certain movie, and it'll take me 15 minutes to convince myself I can speak up and say that I want to watch that movie sometimes. And then I'm like, I'm just going to announce this that took me like 15 minutes to say. Like, it's a fascinating process being on the other side of it, like hyper aware. And
That
so
took
many
me 15 minutes. That's hysterical.
it
It's
does
so
sometimes.
true. I get that. I remember. It's funny. I have two nieces. I love them. They're like middle school age and going into fourth grade. And I was driving them somewhere. I've been driving them around the summer, and I kept checking and like, is my car too hot? Is my car too cold? Tell me, speak up. Because when I was your age, I remember being in someone's car, like a friend's parent or like someone else's car that wasn't my parent, and like roasting to death to the point that I could probably pass out in the back seat. But I would never speak up. God forbid. I was like, hello, can you turn up the air conditioning in this back seat here? Or opposite, like I'm freezing to death, but how dare I ever speak up to say I'm uncomfortable with the temperature in this car? And I told them that story, and they're laughing, like, why didn't you just tell them? I was like, I was too scared to even use my voice to speak up and say, hi, I'm so hot, I'm nauseous, I'm about to puke, can you put it on the air? Like,
Yeah.
that would never happen. I would just suck it up.
Oh my gosh, I so resonate with that too. Yeah, I'm sure many people listening to this can resonate with that story of just the things that we would just keep to ourselves because we didn't want to be a burden. We didn't want to be too much. We didn't want to be annoying. We were told to stay quiet and
Yep.
unseen, unheard, right? And or
Totally.
seen but not heard. Oh, I love that one too.
Yes.
There's
Seen but
so
not.
so much wrapped up in this. And I mean, I feel like I could talk with you for hours
Yeah.
about this stuff. There's so much good here.
Same.
So I'm just curious. Aw, Dawn says, Safi and Justine, I'm so thankful I caught this live. I only have fur babies in the home as my son is 28. This is medicine to my inner child as well. Thank you both so much for this important conversation. Yeah, and you know what? It is never too late. If you're an adult parent, like your kids are all adults now, you can always go back and have these conversations. Oh my gosh, I wish that my dad, before he passed, had come to terms with some of the things that he had not done for his family because he was repressing his own traumatic experiences, right? And I can acknowledge that now, but if we had been able to talk about that and he'd been able to say, like, I experienced this when I was younger and it impacted me in this way, and I really showed up not in a great way for you, right? That would have completely transformed so much of my inner relationship with myself. So it's never too late to have a conversation if you're in contact with somebody.
Oh, absolutely. I always say, like, if you want to understand your parents, sit them down and ask them about their childhood. Like, do a family tree and get details on the dynamics there. You will understand more about the way they are, right? And what trauma they went through to influence who they are. And it's a big thing now, I think, like people in their 30s and 20s starting to question parents too. Like, hey, how come I was parented this way and that way? Because we just have more access to information, right?
Yeah.
We have information about anything we want nowadays, which is it's a good thing, but it gets people questioning things.
Yes. Well, and when I was a public school teacher, I always said to all of my students, question everything. And I was like, and that means me, and that means your parents. And I know that someone's going to be unhappy that I shared this information, but question everything because we can't just take, going back to the Olympics example, right? One picture is like, this is what's happening. We need to dig a little bit deeper, even to our own feelings and our own perspectives. And Dawn, I'm so glad you're still having these conversations with your son.
Yeah.
It's just so important that we learn to come back home to ourselves, to really like my whole big thing that I help people with is alignment and authenticity, because we're so off our what I call our sacred design because of usually the people pleasing. I'm going to ignore this part of my design or this part of my soul spark because mom said not to do it, dad said not to do it, my teacher in 7th grade said not to do it, right? Whoever. I had a therapist when I was 15 who gave me some really bad advice,
Oh no.
right? Like there's some not great people in the field, right? It can be anyone that gives us bad feedback. That's why we've got to question it for ourselves. Like, is this right for me? Does this land for me? Sometimes it does,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes someone is cheering us on in the perfect way, or they have the same vision for us that we have for ourselves.
Yes.
And often not.
Right. Right. And we have to learn how to deal when they don't.
Yes.
How do we deal with how uncomfortable that is?
Yes. So do you have, I'd love just as we're wrapping up our conversation, when you're uncomfortable, because maybe you're confronting something, what are some of your favorite coping skills? What do you like to do to come home to yourself? What do you like to do to deal with that uncomfortable feeling?
Breathing, right? I think deep, slow breaths before you're entering an uncomfortable boundary situation or confronting somebody. Breathe through it. 2, practice. If you are a classic people pleaser that's afraid of confrontation, I want you acting out the scenario out loud while you're taking a shower that day, while you're in the car. Practice, what are you going to say to this person? What do you think they'll say back? What will you say back in return? If our brain can visualize how it's going to go, you will feel much more confident when you're in that moment having to set the boundary or having to confront someone or having to express how you feel when you're kind of scared. So I really think breathe, practice a few times, practice even with a friend, talk out loud with someone that's safe, like, oh, I have to confront this person about this. Can you hear me out? Right. There's so many skills in DBT. There's it's called Dear Man. It's an acronym. That's a great way to help people practice like step by step what I'm going to say to set a boundary with somebody else. So practice, I think is helpful. But also know that you can be uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
We have a low tolerance for discomfort, and we have to remind ourselves, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to speak my mind. It's going to be highly uncomfortable. I'm going to want to like literally die in the moment, but I'm going to do it and I'm going to survive and I'm going to be okay after. Like a little pep talk that like I can do really uncomfortable things and I will feel better once this is over.
Yeah, and I love that just affirmation. We can be uncomfortable. Our window of tolerance for it is pretty minimal as a culture right now, but that's part of the expansion work, right? Is being able to sit in the shadow with ourselves. And I love that, I'm huge into breath work, so I love that as a strategy. And what you were just sharing just reminded me of a recent time that I went in to visit family that I knew there was the possibility it was going to go south because it often does. And so I just prepared myself for, okay, I first set boundaries around how much time I was going to spend there. I communicated that before I went so that everyone was on the same page. And so I sort of created a boundary with time. And then I was very uncomfortable and I breathed and I was like, and soon I will be leaving because I have a time limit on this. And I even had in my head, like, if these certain lines are crossed, I'm going to say something, but otherwise I'm just going to let it go. It's fine because I'm not going to be here long and I don't have to buy into this story. So that's important to remember too. You can kind of
Absolutely.
have lines of what you will take and not take when you're, especially with family, balancing these things out. I think family of origin's possibly the hardest thing to navigate people pleasing with, but
Oh, it's so tough. It's so tough. And pay attention to how you're feeling. And I also say it's okay if in the moment you're triggered and upset and you can't say what you want to say or set the boundary. If you could do it the next day on the phone
yep,
call and call and say, you know what, yesterday when we were together, you said this to me and I was really upset and I was kind of nervous to bring this up, but can you not do blank the next
yeah,
time we're together? And that's okay too, even if it's a week later, right? I think we have this narrative like that happened 2 months ago. Why are you bringing it up now? Well, 2 months ago I was a big chicken and I couldn't say it 2 months ago, but I've done my work, so I'm ready to say it now 2 months later. When I
yes,
saw you on Christmas and you did this, that was very uncomfortable for me. So when I see you on Easter, can you not do it? Like that's okay. That's
yes.
okay.
It is okay for us to change our mind any point and anytime in any situation, right? Consent is key with everything. And that can mean changing our mind on something we were okay with 3 months ago. Or yeah, if you're still thinking about it 3 months later, it's time to still bring it up because it's still really bothering
Let's
you.
push you in the direction of bringing it up.
Oh, well, this has been a beautiful conversation. I definitely am so glad we were connected through the web. We were connected by a mutual
Yes,
Adriana Keefe, right?
yes, she's
And
awesome.
she is amazing. And I am so glad that we have these things in common, that we are just sharing in this mission of helping people step out of anxious living, right? Step into authenticity. So thank you for all you do. I know that being a therapist is it's work. It can be very heavy, but it can also just be so transformative and beautiful. And I'm so glad that you are in the field.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work that you're doing and showing up for society today and having these conversations. It's incredible.
Thank you. So until next time, my friends, I'm Safrianna Lughna, and I got to meet the beautiful Justine Carino today. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, friends, if there's a topic or a guest you'd like to see on, let me know. And I am cheering you all on.